Disclaimer. The information provided in this podcast episode about addiction is for educational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. Consult qualified healthcare professionals for personalized guidance and treatment. This episode may discuss sensitive topics related to addiction. Listener discretion is advised.
In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen.
Hello, beautiful friends. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Claudine.
And welcome to Shokran Very Much, the podcast. This week we're talking about addiction.
This week we are talking with an amazing person and one of our favorite people. He tells some of our favorite jokes. And let me tell you, the number of requests we've got to have him on the podcast is actually amazing. But what we wanted to clarify is we actually had Mike in an episode like a gazillion years ago. He's actually the first person we ever recorded with. And we abused the poor guy. We had no equipment. We were still testing it out. And it turned out like his speaking was amazing. And I wish you could hear that episode. But for your sakes, I'm not going to put that one out. The quality was terrible. And he was gracious enough to come back and do another one. We also had a ton of questions sent in from all of you, so we're super excited to get those answered. Our guest today, I think I already said his name, but that's fine. The man, the myth, and the legend, Dr. Michael Hanna. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for being on the podcast,
Thank
Mike.
you for having me.
Of course. We're going to start with an icebreaker.
Okay.
Okay. What is one thing on your bucket list that you haven't done yet?
Bucket list. To throw up buckets. Maybe go skydiving.
Skydiving?
Yes,
really?
Skydiving, yes.
I really want to go skydiving, actually, so.
I'd be terrified. But I did think you'd say underwater basket weaving.
Oh, yes. Oh, I've done that. Yeah.
He's a professional, actually.
Yeah. Before I get started, Mike, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself?
My background, I'm Egyptian.
I'm Coptic.
In case you couldn't tell.
I'm a professor at a Christian university. My degree is in neurobio, so I do research on addiction. I give rats meth and I meth them up, and I call my meth up rats. So I do research on addiction. I also teach an entire course on addiction, a 16-week course on addiction. So it's a topic that's pretty relevant to almost everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get started. So addictions are addictive.
Wow.
Period.
It's a moment.
I hate it when the dictionary use the own it's the word within the, you know.
Yeah.
But
For
anyways,
another
okay.
episode, we were talking about repentance, and the Google definition was like the action of repenting,
yeah,
and I was like, okay,
thanks,
What does it mean?
Anyway, so we know that they're addictive. Like, we know that drugs are addictive. So why do we still do them?
Sure. So I think a common misconception is that addiction is more of a self-will, right? As long as I can, have enough self-will, we think of it as a logical issue, right? So if I can, as long as I put enough mental power into it, I can go ahead and stop. So most people think of addiction, right, in terms of like psychological willpower. But the truth, right, is that addiction, a major component of addiction, it is a neurobiological disorder, right? So I actually like thinking of addiction as a neurobiological disorder, a spiritual disorder, and a psychological. So it's all of them combined. Most people we may even say it, but we don't truly believe it, but it is highly a neurobiological issue, right? And that's why usually if you've talked to an addict, like a full-blown addict, most of the time they will tell you, I want to stop, right? I know it's messing up my life. I know, right, it's doing this and this and this. It's horrible. I want to stop, right? But then they'll say, but I can't, right? And so, and in fact, a lot of times we think people who, again, do drugs or whatever, they're doing it to get the high. That's probably at the very, very beginning, right? At some point you no longer are actually able to get the high. Right? So a lot of times I can give you so many instances of people say, I can't get high. I now use the drug just to function. Right? I have a person who literally says, I spend $200 a day on heroin just so that I can function as a human being, and it's irritating. So he's angry at himself, right, that he's spending all of this money not so they can get high, but just so that he can function as a human being, right? And so it becomes a biological aspect. And so so because we can't see that, we can't feel it, we don't really think of addiction as biological, and that's why it's so hard to break, right? I'll just give you kind of an example. Let's say so let me give you like an analogy. So let's say I eat a whole bunch of junk food all my life, and most of you are probably thinking that's actually true. Okay, so let's say, right, all I do is eat, fatty foods, all of that. So now I have a messed up, that the stuff that I've ingested has messed up my heart, right? So now I got a messed up heart, right? And now because of that messed up heart, I have high blood pressure, right? And then imagine if someone comes to me, or let's say Natalie has high blood pressure because she's got a heart issue, because that's her food intake. And I say, Natalie, I see that you have a high blood pressure. Lower it.
Oh.
Please, go ahead. Do it now.
Just give me a moment.
Please. If you really love me, if you really care for me, you will lower your blood pressure, right? You laugh, right? But that's the same thing we tell people with addiction, right? How many times say, if you really, like a parent will say, right? If you really, really love me, right, you'll stop. Well, it's the same thing. It's like almost as ridiculous as just to say, just lower your blood pressure because I love you. Or same thing, that having a high blood pressure is bad for you. Does that prevent you from lower?
No.
Same thing, right, with the addict. Just because they know, and most of them, right, know it's messing them up. So it is, that was a very long-winded answer because it is a neurobiological issue.
The other question was, I'm going to just say in case you want to add something, it's what makes addiction so hard to break?
So that's one aspect, right? Is that it is a biological issue. So same concept, right? Is instead of now the junk food, right? So what has happened is that high blood pressure is what? Is a symptom of a what? Messed up heart caused by eating junk food. And the same thing is the symptom of not being able to stop, not being able to stop is just a symptom of what? A messed up brain. And just as the food messed up the heart, in this case, the drugs messed up the brain. Now you got a messed up brain, right? And this, right, altered brain chemistry and brain rewiring, now the symptom of that is you can't control it. So part of it is because of that. Then the second thing is because your brain, right, is your brain and your body, right? Your brain will so we'll talk about withdrawal symptoms. Is a lot of times people end up doing drugs, like I was saying, especially if you're a true addict, right? You end up doing the drug, like I said, to what? Function, right? So what ends up happening is your body adapts, right, to the presence of the drug there, because now that's its norm. So the norm is, right, the drugs are there. So once the drugs are no longer there, right, then that causes major issues, right, into the body. And so, right, you end up feeling extreme pain. So for example, someone who's a true alcoholic, if they don't have alcohol, they will have seizures and something called the DTs, right? And so, right, one person that was saying, I take alcohol is not a drug for me. Alcohol is my medicine.
Oh.
It prevents, I'm not doing it to get drunk. I'm doing it so that I don't have the seizures. I don't have the, right, see it again at a certain point in transitions where, like I said, they can't get high. They actually see the drug as their medicine, right, to keep them functioning, right? Same thing. Like this was years ago. There was it was all over the news. There was this high school teacher. Between passing periods, like fifth and sixth period, whatever, the principal happened to be walking in, and the teacher was shooting up heroin. Right, and of course, all over the news, like this horrible teacher, this horrible, right? But why was he doing it? He was actually doing it so that he can function in class. He wasn't doing so that he can be high. Again, but that's how it's become. It's like any person who has a headache, right? They'll take Tylenol, whatever, so that they can get through the class. That for him, right? That Tylenol was the heroin that would keep him going, right? He wasn't trying to get high per se in class. So that's part of the issue is the body becomes, and obviously different drugs, right? That process, right, will happen to at different rates depending on the drug. And then the other thing is that your brain is really, 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 really smart in that it tries to make connections between stimuli, right, or drug paraphernalia or whatever it is, and the act of, right, taking drugs. So for example, right, if every time I take drugs, right, in the basement, right, what's going to happen is soon my brain recognizes basement is the location for where I take drugs. So there's something called homeostasis, right? Like body temperature, right? So your body stays at this natural homeostasis, right? And then what ends up happening is, let's say, for example, just to simplify it, right? All drugs, for the most part, all drugs work on dopamine, right? So, right, when I take drugs, it's going to raise my dopamine levels. So what's going to happen is I walk down into that basement, right? I'm at, let's say, just again, simple numbers, right? Let's say natural levels of dopamine is 50 units, whatever that means, right? Okay, that's just a simplified number, right? So I'm at 50 units, right? Okay, I take drugs, I go to 60 units, right? Okay, next day I go back, right? After taking drugs, I'm back at 50, right? I walk into my basement, right? I walk into my basement, my brain sees the basement and recognizes, hey, every time I'm in that basement, I know I'm about to get drugs. And it wants to stay at homeostasis. So before it was raising it up from 50 to 60, that 10% increase. So then your brain says, oh, I want to stay at that 50. So what that it does, once it sees the basement, it naturally decrease it.
Oh.
So what happens is if you don't take the drugs, you're going to get these strong cravings.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of times people call like triggers, right? They're triggers. They're actually like physical things, right? Sometimes they're emotional states as well, right? That will trigger the brain to do the opposite of what the drug does. And so now you get this intense, craving. And so, that's why you'll a lot of times see people, if you think about it, where do we send people to get help?
Mental hospital?
Rehab?
Rehab centers. Okay, yeah. Okay. Right. Rehab
That's
centers.
different kind of help.
Yeah. And where are these rehab centers usually?
In the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere, right? Exactly. They're very, very, very far away. What happens? They're good for 3, 4, 5 months, and they're like, no cravings. I feel I'm rehabilitated.
Oh.
I'm good. Everything is fine.
And then they go back.
Send them back home. You're good to go. Usually within a couple days, what happens?
They
They relapse because all of the triggers.
Yeah.
I actually read a study once that said that like people who have an addiction to like smoking are more likely to smoke when they see a not smoking and don't smoke sign.
Yep.
Because they see it and they're like, wait, now I want it.
Exactly. That's the brain, right?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily. And why is that happening? Is because again, the brain sees that stimuli. Does it's called the term just slipped my mind, but it does the opposite effect, right? And then now all of a sudden you've got this very, very, very strong craving, right? And then it gets really, really, really hard. Think about it. So, for example, like if you're again maybe a meth addict, right? It could be certain places, certain things, right? Whatever, a pipe or whatever. But for example, and this is where it gets really, really tough. Let's say you're struggling with pornography. What's the trigger?
Yeah. Well,
Phone and computer. You can't you can't get away from those triggers.
Because I was just about to ask you. You've been talking a lot about drugs, but there's like a lot of different other addictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the science out there is actually, so for example, like it's very, right, there are clear telltale signs, right, brain scans, whatever, that this brain, right, is, that this person is, has an addiction, right? So you can clearly see, signs within a brain scan. This person has changes in their brain that like indicate addiction, right? The weird thing is, I can tell you this person, right, based on these features, right, reduced dopamine receptors, blah, 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 has, right, is like, if you were to give me 2 scans and tell me one of them is an addict, one of them is not, right, I can say which one is, right, based on the scan, but I wouldn't be able to tell you which drug, whether it's a drug or actually a behavioral addiction, because they all actually work on the same neural pathways.
So an addiction like social media or pornography or all of that, they would still have like a physical effect on them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you said a term like social media addiction. So so this is just my own thing. I think we use the word, in general, addiction very broadly and lightly. So people will say, I have an addiction to ice cream. I have an addiction to Starbucks.
Yeah.
Right. So usually, at least in the field, we don't use addiction that lightly. There's very, very kind of stringent definitions of, right, an addiction. And for the most part, right, is, right, one of the major hallmark features of addiction is what we say is continued use despite negative consequences.
Oh.
Right. So someone says, right, okay, you're going to go to jail if you don't do, right, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose your kid. What ends up happening? They don't want to, but they still do it anyways, right? And God, no one, for the most part, says, I want to really go to jail, right? But they do it anyways, right? I have a feeling for the people who say, I'm sorry, that, I'm a Starbucks addict. I'm pretty sure if you say all of a sudden, if you drink Starbucks, you're going to we're going to take away your kid, or we're going to make it illegal. I mean, maybe some people will still do that, but whatever. I mean, most people will, right? Most people will stop.
Yeah.
So I would actually say that's when people say I have a Starbucks addiction, like in my mind, I know what they mean, but that's actually not really an addiction. So, yeah.
But I mean, like, what makes it so hard? Like, I know drugs are bad, but like, why do people still do them? Like, I'm pretty sure like schools now are like, drugs are bad. There's like all these like
people are being educated more than before.
Yeah, and I feel like in a sense it's like, when your mom's like, don't eat the ice cream, but it makes you want to eat it anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
is what you're asking, like, why do they start in the beginning, or why do they keep doing it once
why
they
did
start?
they start? Like, I know drugs are bad. Yeah. Like, why am I doing it? Like, the consequences.
I mean, obviously addiction is a very broad thing, and different people will do it for different reasons. So it's hard to generalize. I can give some, right, but I would say a couple reasons to that. One, I think still people don't recognize that it's a biological issue. I mean, we talk about it, but think about it. Everything that we do, think about our legal system. The legal system says, right, there's like that 3 strikes rule, you're out, right, type of things. If someone gets caught with doing drugs or whatever, they go to what? Jail. Yeah. They don't get treated. They don't go to rehab, right? And right, what has happened over the course of years, right, starting from Nixon, who started what is known as the war on drugs, is they just said, well, okay, more and more strict, like harsher penalties for. Right. So now, I mean, you can get, for, selling and doing drugs, you can like get a very, very long-term sentence. Think about it. How are they thinking of addiction? Logical. If I scare them enough, then they will logically come to again. And we said addiction is, right. So even though we say, addiction is a biological, we still don't truly believe it. So same thing as most people will say, and it's the thing, it won't happen to me. Can't tell you how many people have told me that. Won't happen to me, right? And so far, I haven't met one addict who said, Yeah, I plan to be an addict right from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a very, very, very slippery slope. It's not like one day you wake up, you're an addict, right? Okay. So that's the problem, is that a lot of times people don't truly believe the biological aspect, and they just think, I can mentally beat this. I've got a strong power. And usually what I've seen, the people who have the hardest time with it is the people that are actually smart. Because everything so far that they've done in their lives, they've been able to use their wits, their brains, to get out of a problem, out of a solution. But here's the thing, same thing, if you've got Albert Einstein, and the dumbest person in the world, right, has diabetes, just because Albert Einstein is smart is not going to he's not going to will smart himself enough to not have high blood sugar, right? Yeah. Same thing, right? You can be smart, right? You can know everything, but that's not going to prevent you. Then the other why people start is there's clearly different reasons, right? So some people do use it as a coping mechanism. Right, so and some people peer pressure, some people curiosity. So there's a variety of reasons. So I don't think we can ever just categorize it as one. Some people, hey, my friends are doing it. Let me try. Or there's peer pressure, or and so there's different reasons. And for some people, it's a coping mechanism, right? I know a few people who had major trauma in life, and right, what was the thing that made that pain go away? The drugs. Right?
Yeah.
When you talked about how people treat drugs, or how the justice system treats drugs, I remember reading something in class once about in Portugal. Mm-hmm. They actually first they tried the way we do it here, where they're punished with prison and all of that, and then they tried actually lifting all of the legal bans against drugs. And they saw that the drug problem actually the rates decreased once all the bans were removed. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, why does the treatment actually the way they deal with it matter?
Right. So there's a couple different things that are out there. There's the delegalization, the decriminalization, right? And then so those are two kind of things, and some countries have gone decriminalization, no longer making it, or the legalization of them. So part of it going down is obviously if you can't count how many offenses, right? That's part of it. But I'm not saying. Yeah. But here's the idea is the legal system. And things are starting to change, but unfortunately very slow. Like right now, there's something called drug courts, right? So a drug court, right, is where if someone gets caught or whatever, right, they'll give them the option: you either go to jail or you get treatment, right? So there's there's that even in the in our system, but it's not as much of it is used, right? So there's still most of the sentencing is more of a legal issue rather than that. So they're not getting the treatment that they need, right? So I'm not sure about the different countries how they're working, if they're offering them, right? So I have issues with the legalization of all drugs, which just says, right, all drugs are legal, because unfortunately, when people say this drug is legal, they automatically assume legality equates with safety. If a drug is legal, then it's safe. Once you legalize something, right, then you have that mind. So let me ask you guys, what are the two top killing drugs?
Fentanyl.
Nicotine,
good.
It's not just cigarettes.
Cigarettes, yeah. And nicotine. What's the second one?
Marijuana? No? Was it? No.
Not fentanyl. Fentanyl has high. Yeah. But not fentanyl.
I don't know. I only know
meth, cocaine.
Nope.
Well, it's the only other legal ones, like caffeine.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I read it somewhere.
Yeah.
Good job.
So the two legal drugs,
Yeah.
the two drugs that kill the most people,
Or legal.
the two legal ones,
Yeah.
right? So legality does not equate with, right? But that's, you know, and same thing as once, like, you know, marijuana got legal, right? Then people thought, well, it's legal, so it must be
Good.
safe. Exactly. And the evidence out there is clearly, right, it has lots of effects. That could be another podcast. Right. So that's the issue, right? The decriminalization, that's another issue where you say, okay, we're not going to go ahead and the drugs are still legal, but we're not going to go ahead and send you for 25 years in prison.
Yeah.
We'll get you treatment, right?
Yeah.
Again, that's by the way, just to make it clear, that's my own personal thoughts on those issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shokran very much for listening to part 1 of Dr. Michael Hanna's All About Addiction. I hate to do this to you, but you will have to wait till next week to hear the rest of it.
Shokran very much for listening.
And we'll see you next week.